Please welcome Arjun Sethi, co-CEO of Kraken and chairman of Tribe Capital. Rohan Goswami, Semafor's business reporter, moderates this conversation.
I hope you guys missed me. Arjun, you wear an astonishing number of hats. 5 different companies you've co-founded. You're a VC. And you're also the co-CEO of Kraken. And you took that job in October of 2024. Great timing.
Yeah, a year ago.
A month before the election. And I think I want to start there with President Trump. There was a story in the Financial Times today that the president's family has made something like $1 billion off their crypto investments. And even as his administration has been so helpful and positive for your industry, there are, I think, pretty widespread questions about the risks that come with having a president that makes so much money off this. Do you think that the president's involvement in the space undermines investor confidence in the whole space altogether?
I think it's the question is like a catch-22 question. Look, I think there's existing precedents of, like, you separate the president from the family or previous entities. And look, I think rule of law is pretty established for commodities, securities, corporations, et cetera. So it's not, I don't know the specifics of how much they've appreciated in their crypto holdings, but if you were in crypto over the last 10 years or even the last 2 years, there's just a great appreciation for it.
Yeah. You have a very clear vision about how tokenization, about how democratizing finance can actually do wonders for everybody. And the regulatory framework that has been built up over the last 10 months, specifically around stablecoins, it's done a lot to get us there. It's a good start for you guys anyways. What's left on your wish list? I guess, what are the 3 things you want to see from this administration in the next few years?
I think it's less from the administration because, so if you take a step back, worldwide, people have already sort of made statements around what crypto is going to be, what's the future of Rails. You see this. In fact, if you just look at US technology Rails, we've been so far behind for 20, 30 years, and it's kind of interesting. US has this habit of falling behind, and then we kind of leapfrog, fall behind, then leapfrog. And you can just think of mobile, LTE, 5G networks, et cetera. So the same thing is happening in the payments ecosystem. So I think we're doing a good job by saying, okay, great, we've really fallen behind. But it's not just crypto Rails, it's not just liquidity, but what does it mean to be able to, akin to the internet, program capital that's 24/7. It's fully liquid, it's transparent, and it's open. And I think when people use these words, they kind of gloss over it as if it's not important. It's extremely important because, for the first time ever, you're seeing worldwide adoption of new products and technologies at a faster and faster rate. With that comes good and bad, but what's great about it is that it's just better for the consumer. It's more of their own capital that they own. I think it's really important, especially when you think about your own sovereign property rights, when you start thinking about your own collateral or assets, it's yours. And so companies like ours or other companies in the ecosystem are kind of fighting for that model, and so that we can win on an open level playing field rather than regulatory monopolistic companies.
I mean, to the point about collateral, if I own a home and I want to borrow against the value of that home, I have to go get a HELOC or mortgage my house, and I can't readily tap into that capital. Is there a world where, as we start to tokenize more and more assets, I could theoretically borrow against the value of my house to pay for my coffee?
Yeah, I think it's more first principles on that, which is if you look at any asset that you hold anywhere, it's fragmented like liquidity. So if you've got your home, it's illiquid, fragmented, where you got to work with the bank or the relationship that you might have, and they're trying to look at you holistically to say, am I going to make money off of you? And then you think about like equities, commodities, where your savings account may be, checking account may be, like all of this stuff gets like what I call very walled garden. And it's actually quite limiting. And in the US, we're much more forward about our financialization of services and financialization as a whole. But outside the United States, even in places like Canada, UK, Europe, they're even further behind, where this stuff is even more locked. There's less liquidity, and it's even more fragmented, which, to be frank, creates a lot of systemic risk per category, which is why we see this happening all the time.
Say more about that on the systemic risk part.
Yeah, I mean, it makes the companies that are involved, the sovereigns that are involved, the institutions involved. Like, I feel like I've been saying this for the last couple of weeks, but if you take a look at even the repo markets here in the United States, it's a highly concentrated marketplace, and it's not 50,000 participants. It's like 10 or 30. And so I don't think people realize how concentrated and systemic this is in the first place. And another thing, with a lot of the hats, I do a lot of banking and financial services outside the United States. Countries outside the United States are used to volatility, so their risk management actually is better, so they see less failures, and so it's not something we talk about. For Kraken, our largest counterparty risk are the banks in the United States. We've lost over $100 million of our balance sheet or our customers, where we have to make our customers whole or ourselves because there's banking problems, reconciliation efforts. They lose something in between all these old rails. It's problematic, and I think a lot of people don't talk through these pieces. When you've got something that's open, transparent, programmable, you can look at the contract, you can look where the risk lies, you can look at what the concentration looks like, and you can make risk management moves, not quarter by quarter. You can do it second by second.
Right. To your point about your many hats, right? It seems like fintechs generally, neobanks specifically, have done incredibly well in basically every major economy except the U.S. Right? Major developing economy, I should say. Peer-to-peer, person to business. Why can't we figure it out? Why can't we get it right here?
So there's a couple of reasons, and it's not necessarily bad. Like, we're also the only capital market where you're able to have access to capital and provide debt, et cetera. Is that you've got a bunch of folks in the middle. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just we've created this post-World War II system that's worked well enough for us, and it's hard to unseat it or adopt or evolve it or even revolutionize some of these parts because, frankly, the incentive alignment isn't there. If you don't have anything, then you're able to build it, which is what you see in Mexico, Brazil, India, all these Southeast Asian countries that they didn't have the rails, and so they're, again, leapfrogging, where it's kind of like they didn't have landlines, they didn't have DSL, they didn't have T1 lines, so they just moved over to mobile, and so they're much further. We have the same problem with the post-World War II banking system, is that we're still stuck in it, and we haven't been able to leapfrog, and so part of these initiatives that you see at the House, at the Senate, and at the White House is like, hey, this is the friction that we have in the ecosystem. How can we sort of enable this so that everyone has the ability to, there's this term that a lot of people use, like, hey, the future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed. It's the exact same thing here in the United States. We use the word underbanked, but in some cases, it's not just underbanked that you don't have a bank. It's that, hey, why can't I provide, the average individual a 13% yield? Why is it not available? Well, there's just all these rules and restrictions. There's not enough disclosure. There's not enough transparency. But you get more participants, you're able to start offering those products.
Let's talk about yield, because it does seem like so much of the profit and the lucrative part of the crypto space specifically is hoovered up by quantitative trading firms or actual big institutions that have desks that trade these assets. I mean, these are volatile assets. How do you, when crypto's premise, part of the premise was making finance more equitable for everyone, how do you solve for that? How do you reallocate so much of the profit that goes towards these big guys, towards everyday investors?
Well, you're looking at one specific part of the ecosystem, like those same participants, market participants that create stability and liquidity in the ecosystem are the same participants that are in the traditional FX and traditional equities. So it's less about that. It's more about you have multiple participants in one global liquidity system, which actually takes out risk from the system. Okay. So before it was BTC, ETH. Now it's BTC, ETH, alt assets, tokenized assets, et cetera. The more and more assets that you have on one single unified collateral system and global liquidity, actually the less risk in the system. And I think that's something that people don't see, which is even over the last week, we had our biggest drawdown in liquidations in crypto history, but in an instant, we're back to normal at the same pace as the way in which you look at traditional markets, which creates, again, that stability, trust, and transparency.
Let's talk about traditional markets. Even as historical legacy financial institutions have moved into the crypto space, crypto participants are also moving into the traditional equity markets. How do you beat those guys at their own game? What's your edge over TD, any of the big guys?
That's the easiest answer. The easiest answer there is, how do you go back to the first principles, even on what this country was founded on, which is property rights. Mm-hmm. It's mine. It's sovereign. And I should be able to make the decision off of my own capital and property. And so what does crypto solve for that? Which is let's take tokenized equities. Why is that important? Well, If you own equities here in the United States, you give it to a broker, they make money off of you to do securities lending and a couple of other services. Well, in crypto, if you got a tokenized asset, you could you could hold that token and you should be able to get the yield off the securities lending because it's your assets. And so I think part of it is like if you're removing some of the thresholds of the middlemen in between that make all that money. Again, I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just been institutional. Then you're bringing back more accountability and rights to the individual, more power for them and sovereign of their own asset, where they can actually, when I say yield, you're able to make money off of your own asset versus a bunch of other institutions to make money off your asset. And I think, again, first principles, what crypto allows you to do is to be able to bring that power back to the consumer and to the user. So when we build out our company or any of the protocols that we support, that's the premise.
Before, I want to turn to how you think about investing in this space, but on that point, the last panel we talked about how, or at least Leaf's perspective was, investor protections are good for the crypto markets. And when you're moving conventional equities on-chain, when you're modernizing them, in other words, there isn't a framework in place right now that offers the same level of protection that I would get holding something in my brokerage account. Do you think there's a way to solve for that easily and handily with the existing frameworks, or do we need to go out and create new legislation, new regulatory things around it?
No, I mean, look, tokenized securities is securities. That's not a complicated a topic. It's like you want to be able to have the same investor protections and consumer protections that you would have for anyone. It's just more about what is the flow of capital, where is it custodied, those exist, right? And so putting a wrapper and technology around an asset doesn't change what the asset is, it doesn't change the laws around it. It's more about now that I have access to it, or you have access to it, or I can have a tokenized token, again, sitting on my phone, that I'm able to make money passively rather than have 16 other folks make money along the way.
Yeah. For last bit of time here, let's put on your venture hat for a second. I mean, when you look at the US landscape, I know you're very bullish on India as well, but talking about the US for a second, where do you see the most growth, the most opportunity? It feels like AI is saturated everything. There's no escaping that in any space that you invest in the tech world. But intrinsically, like purely fintech perspective, where do you see the most opportunity over the next year or two?
Look, if you so the themes of today are AI, crypto, and defense. So I'll kind of walk through them one by one. And I think the market's very simply, which is it's either unbounded, we don't know what it's going to look like with massive distribution, or it's bounded. Defense is bounded. You know who wants to purchase it. You kind of understand what the dynamics look like, and it's like what is the edge that you're going to have, in terms of internal or external battlefields, however you want to define that. With AI, it's a workflow, and crypto, I think people think of it as an asset class. It's not. It's also a workflow. Is that the more it gets embedded into what you do, or where it's placed and the assets that you have, the more it gets distributed worldwide. And you're talking about 5 billion plus people. These are also the same people that are getting access to their phone, edge computing, AI workflows. So these are all happening, one by one. If you go very technical into like blockchain and crypto, you can talk about, decentralized computing, et cetera. But these are all working in concert with each other. And so software is software, which is like what's beautiful about it. And then the internet was the internet, which is its global distribution and permissionless, which is what was beautiful about it. And I think with AI and crypto, what's beautiful about it is, again, it's like permissionless innovation to be able to build at the speed of light at some point. And so for me to be able to create my own wallet, my own software as an individual, just leveraging AI or ChatGPT or Anthropic, and then being able to participate in a global, global liquidity or the internet at that speed is, frankly, I don't even think about the jobs that are going to get lost because the amount that are going to get created are times 1,000. It's the other way around, and I think people kind of forget that, which is if you just take a look at the amount of jobs that the internet has created, imagine what happens with worldwide global capital liquidity, worldwide access, and then just more proliferation of AI on top of the internet. Like it's extremely unbounded.
Yeah, this is wonderful, Arjun. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.